Welcome to Elevating Consciousness, the podcast that brings you mind-expansive conversations into the heart of what matters most. I'm your host, Artem, and our guest today is Kowalski, an ex-marketing exec turned solopreneur. In this episode, we speak about money and meaning and how Kyle has been navigating that relationship since leaving the corporate world. We also discuss ego development theory, the meta crisis, Kyle's Synthesizer course, and the various challenges of post-conventional life. Enjoy. Kyle, welcome back to the show, man.
Thanks for having me. Round two. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So I just want to set some context before we dive in. You've been on the show before and we spoke about your existential crisis and how you started the Sloww knowledge base and community, along with many other topics from simple and intentional living, the synthesizing mind, structuring learning and reading, free will, lottery of birth, and many other things. And I'll link that conversation in the show notes of this episode. So for those who want to learn a little bit more about you and your journey, they can do that. With that said, there are so many other topics we can discuss and way more than we'll have time to get to today, but I'm curious to see where this conversation will take us. Maybe first we can start with money and meaning. Not too long ago, you commented on my How to Bridge Money and Meaning podcast with Layman Pascal, and you said you have a lot to say on this topic. So I'm curious to know what feels most alive for you right now around this topic of money and meaning.
Yeah, so we could probably spend the entire podcast just talking about this one subject. It's such a big subject, but the way that I feel like might make sense to tackle this in this conversation is between like two different buckets. One is like the outside observer bucket. So what I feel like I've observed around this topic of meaning and money, from observing like the meta crisis space, observing the game B space, observing other entrepreneurs who are trying to make it, doing something meaningful. Whether you want to call it like conscious capitalism or enlightened entrepreneurship, intentional business, spiritual business, there are all these different terms, right, for what some entrepreneurs are trying to do now. But in terms of this observation bucket, and then I guess the second bucket would be what I've personally experienced and what I'm trying to do and how I'm trying to make it all happen. Because to your point, more and more people are trying to, from any of these spaces, trying to figure out how they monetize meaning to a certain degree. What's great about this is a lot of people in, even as of like 5 years ago, maybe consider like John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. That blew up, right? That hit the cultural zeitgeist at the right time. And everybody was looking for meaning. Everybody kind of resonated with the idea of a meaning crisis. Well, what I've seen now is that more and more people have found meaning, but now they're searching for that money aspect. Maybe they were working a career where they were making money, but it wasn't meaningful. They've since found money, or they've since found meaning, but now they're trying to figure out the money part. It's like this two-part or two sides of a coin kind of thing. And the ideal goal is to figure out how you can do both or have both at the same time. So there's this observation bucket and this experience bucket. So we'll start with observation. So I don't know anything about the world, the meta crisis world, in terms of grants, fundraising, crowdfunding, donations. You probably have seen more of this than I have, just in terms of your conversations. But that seems like a whole different world to me in terms of how you make money from, requesting donations, seeking out grants, writing proposals, things like that. That's a whole different world that I have no experience in whatsoever. And then you kind of adjacent to that meta crisis space, or even, as a sub part of it, you've got the game B space. So what I've seen there is that you've got people who are wanting to shift to the game B mentality, but they don't want to play any parts of game A. But what's strange about that is like so much of game B still has to rely on game A. I've even seen people in the game B space who, celebrate hitting it big and getting in mainstream media. But that is kind of like the antithesis of game B to a certain degree. There's still popularity contests, social proof, all these aspects of game B that are game A that you have to play, even if you're trying to shift to game B. So there's like that kind of space. And then entrepreneurs, obviously, that we discussed. All in all, though, there are people who have found meaning, I feel like, but are still searching for that money aspect. So that kind of gets into the second bucket, which is my own lived experience of, okay, so I'm observing all of these other examples out there of what people are trying to do, what kind of the cultural zeitgeist is now, how things have moved on from the meaning crisis to maybe the money crisis, but you have meaning. So from a lived experience perspective, my approach has always been meaning before money, or you could say purpose before profit. So this is what I outline in my ebook, IKIGAI 2.0. It's the exact process that I feel like I went through, from existential crisis to finding purpose first, and then as an optional byproduct, monetizing that. So I actually got this idea from Maria Popova, where she talks about with the Marginalian, which was formerly called Brain Pickings, the idea that she says everything that she does is personal development first, with business development as a byproduct. And that resonated with me immediately in terms of, yes, like do it for yourself first. And a lot of entrepreneurs say this. Naval Ravikant says this in terms of like combining wealth and wisdom. You have to do it for yourself first, because you're probably going to be doing it, especially in the entrepreneurial space, for 7 to 10 plus years before you really kind of hit your stride and start making like a sustainable, livable income. So that's kind of the approach that I've taken, is that money or profit are a byproduct of meaning or purpose. So if you find meaning and purpose first, you have the lever, you could say, of an optional byproduct of monetizing it. So for me, because my background is or was in marketing and selling things, business to consumer or business to business, things like that. Like I said, my mind doesn't function in the meta crisis space of grants and fundraising and crowdfunding and donations and things like that. I actually tried donations on Sloww when I first got started, and I don't think there was a single donation. So it's just really hard to play that game from a money perspective in terms of, I call this like the volume versus price game. If you're trying to go for volume, it's really hard to find volume. I've realized this through just launching different products at different price points over the years. So for instance, the IKIGAI ebook is like $15 on the low end. Then I've got digital products that are in like the $75 to $99 range, the premium membership, which is kind of in that $99 a year range. And now courses on the higher end, starting at like $500 or so. I've also seen people do retreats for multi-$1,000. And this idea of volume versus price is, if you're going for volume on the low end, in a lot of cases, people think of like a book. You're right. It's a $10 to $15 purchase, but you have to sell a ton of them to be able to actually monetize it in a way where it's a sustainable, livable income. On the flip side, if you're selling multi-$1,000 retreats, I actually just saw someone who launched a new program with like a retreat involved, but it wasn't considered like a course. It was like a more holistic, like larger program, but it was 12 spots at $6,000 a pop. And that was it. And it was capped at that. So you've got that range, right? You've got the low end where you have to sell, thousands and thousands of books at a low price point, or you can sell something higher priced to a lower volume of people and be able to make an income, be able to make the same income either way. And I've just found over the years that the low price, high volume play is just really, really difficult to do. So I'm shifting more to, and I'm still trying to figure this out too, right? I'm in entrepreneurship and training, where the training is, and the playing field are the same thing, where you're just figuring out trial and error, like messing with different price points, seeing what resonates with people, what doesn't, kind of testing the market. And I've just figured out over the years that it's just really hard to create a livable, sustainable income on the lower price point, higher volume plays. And all in all, what I'm trying to do is kind of create a portfolio of products at different price points that add up eventually to a sustainable, livable income where finally, the meaning and the purpose has been monetized to a point where it's something that's sustainable for the long term. Because my goal is to never go back to the marketing world. I don't want to go back to my career in any way, shape, or form. So that's the goal for me. And the other thing that helps with this, that makes it a possibility, is if you adopt intentional living principles, then you're naturally lowering your expenses and your spending. So that way your quote unquote success as an entrepreneur is a higher likelihood because you have less expenses and spending to cover. So it's kind of like you're pulling both levers at the same time. You're trying to ramp up monetization while ramping down spending. And I feel like for those who at least are in my case, where it's funny because something in like Enneagram, I think, talks about this for like my Enneagram type or something. It's like you're willing to basically subtract your lifestyle design to zero to make it doing what you want to do. And that really resonated with me. Like, yeah, I would be willing, I would be willing to subtract it down to, get rid of even the few things behind me and be able to make it. Yeah, but yeah.
Yeah. So many pieces there, and the big picture, kind of looking at the meta crisis and game B, and how people are approaching different ways of making money. And like, I'm very much similar to you in the sense that, like, I only know how to function in capitalism, and I see kind of these other, like, gift economy and things like that. And people do non-for-profits, and I kind of see how a lot of those non-for-profits seem to struggle, seem to constantly, like, be begging for money, and they're just not able to sustain themselves. So I don't know how effective all these other models are, but yeah, like, I've been trying to figure out, how do I do capitalism in a more conscious way? And there's other things you mentioned, like, living intentionally and living, like, well beyond, keeping your expenses low and living way beyond your income level. And like, that's been really difficult, having two children and living in Brooklyn, New York. The cost of living here is very high. For better or worse, me and my wife decided to get a house. So that right there, just the mortgage, just that's it. It would kind of just ate into our income a lot. So yeah, like, I've been an entrepreneur. Like, I've never been in corporate. I've never had a corporate job. I've been kind of an entrepreneur for most of my life. I did e-commerce for 5 years, and that ultimately, and that was me kind of, this ties back to the money and meaning thing. Like, that was me pursuing money, right? Like, a lot of my buddies were doing that, and I was trying to figure out how to make money, because I was at this point, like, I was doing rap for a while, and I wasn't seeing any money doing that. And my wife was like, hey, like, we got to kind of get married, we got to move out, we got to do different things. And so I was trying to figure out, like, how can I make money? I seen a lot of my buddies doing this e-commerce stuff, and I pursued that. And yeah, it just ultimately, it didn't really end up working out on the scale that I thought it would. And I mean, I learned a lot. I learned so much, but the meaning was missing. And so now, my wife's business took off. She has a psychotherapy practice. We have like over 20 clinicians, and I ended up joining her and working with her. And in that time, I also kind of started my podcast. And even when I was doing the e-commerce stuff, I was very much in personal development, like learning, reading, and doing all this stuff. So for me, it's like, I have all this meaning stuff. I have a job, like, I'm working with my wife, and still now, like, the expenses are getting really high. So I'm trying to figure out, like, how do I, potentially create products or courses, or, be able to monetize the podcast. I'm also a coach, fairly new. So I'm also trying to figure out the systems around that. How do I find clientele? So yeah, I just wanted to kind of share a little bit of my story and, like, where I'm at, but I'm also, like, really curious, what the transition was like for you when you actually quit. Were you sitting on a certain amount of money where you're like, all right, I have enough money for X amount of time? What was, like, that transition like for you, from, like, quitting the corporate job and then working on Sloww?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my existential crisis was about 8 years into my marketing and advertising career. And then I continued to work another 2.5 years post-crisis. Those were actually more brutal than the crisis itself. The crisis was like a 6-week acute thing that kind of set me on the path of discovering some of the intentional living stuff, starting to figure out life purpose in like 2016 and 2017. But those extra 2.5 years, I call them like my 2.5 years of increasing cognitive dissonance. Because like you said, you're trying to learn all of this personal development stuff on the side of all the other things you're trying to do in your life at the same time, just to stay afloat. But all the things that I was learning were offset by how I was still showing up to my 9-to-5 corporate job in the clothing and apparel industry as a brand strategy marketing director. And it just, the dissonance just built and built and built, where the stuff I was learning did not resonate with how I was still living. And it just reached this boiling breaking point where, and I think part of it that helped was I think I was wearing down my wife over those 2.5 years of just, I was getting increasingly frustrated. The purposelessness was still there. The burnout was still there. In the midst of my last job in my career, I was working 60 to 80-hour weeks for basically like months and months straight. And so all of this was just boiling, and it just finally hit a breaking point where I think my wife realized, okay, you gotta, I feel like I've always had this like entrepreneurship bug, because I had been working on other side business ideas. And like you said, you've tried different things, e-commerce, rap, all these different things. And I had to kind of go through that too, where I tried at least 4 different things before Sloww. One of them, funny enough, was like an e-commerce clothing brand that I wanted to create. And then I realized, oh, I'm not actually a graphic designer to actually make all the designs that I've, imagined and envisioned in my head. I would have to actually outsource that. And so that kind of, ended up destroying that. But I worked on that idea as a side business for like 10 years and ditched it when the crisis came and Sloww happened and things like that. But to your question, yeah, the thing that did help was I had worked in a career for 10 years. That's where it is tough when I get messages from people who are like in their early 20s and they just want to go straight into something like this. The benefit is that, yeah, you've got a little bit more freedom and you can play with things and just test, trial and error and live life as an adventure a little bit when you're a little bit younger. And you don't have those extra responsibilities of family, house, mortgage, kids, and things like that yet. But the downside is that they don't have the same experience and they haven't created kind of what I call an entrepreneurial runway. And that's what I feel like I tried to do over those at least extra 2.5 years to a certain degree, was kind of stockpile some runway to be able to get started. Because like I said, I had come across Naval Ravikant saying it can take 7+ years to make it as an entrepreneur. So I knew I had to kind of stockpile some runway to give myself some leeway. So that did help a bit. And then cutting expenses helped a bit. We talked about this. I actually watched our first podcast last night. And it's funny how much is still the same after a year and has changed after a year. But we talked in that last episode about how my wife and I had cut our household expenses by 30% year over year. So obviously that helps a ton to offset some of the spending and expenses there. But it still wasn't an easy decision. Even with all of that cognitive dissonance, even like I think 6 months, maybe less than 6 months prior to me completely just quitting my career, I was applying at other jobs. So I applied at like American Apparel to be their marketing director. I applied at Garmin, which is a big company in Kansas City, to be a marketing director. So it's never easy, right? Because it's what you've known for so long. It's what you're comfortable in. You wonder if you can make it without the salary and the benefits and everything else. But it got to the point where, funny enough, I ended up withdrawing my name from the American Apparel job. I just didn't think it was right. The job actually was in Barbados. So it's American Apparel, which is now owned by Hanes brand, I think, which is in Canada, and it's based out of Barbados. So my wife and I would have had to move to Barbados. So that wasn't going to work. And then the other one was Garmin, and I just got rejected. I didn't even get an interview. And I had like friends that worked there and whatever. And so the funny thing to me is that I got rejected from my first ever job that I applied for in marketing. And then that's what kind of got me into digital marketing. I applied to be a research analyst at a company. And I wish that would have panned out, because I feel like that's what I'm doing now. And that probably would have helped me figure it out. But instead, I got a job in digital marketing. And then sure enough, you wake up 10 years later and you're like, how did I ever get into this digital marketing career in the first place? Obviously, like you said, you're able to take some skills from the other things that you've tried and apply those to something new that you're doing in a new way. So I'm able to apply all the digital marketing things that I learned over my career to things I'm doing with Sloww, which is super helpful. But yeah, I got rejected from my first job, got rejected from my last job. And that kind of forced me into a corner of, no option B. It was like, the cognitive dissonance has reached the boiling point, the breaking point. I have no other jobs that I'm interested in. This isn't like a now or never, try this entrepreneurship thing. And I just kind of pulled the trigger on it. But the entrepreneurial runway of some funding helped before making that leap, and then just giving it a try. But I've always thought, like, if I have to go back to work, in some way, shape, or form for somebody else, who would I want to work for? And I think about people like Zach Stein and Jonathan Rowson, Suzanne Kogreuter, all these people who I feel like get it to a certain degree. And if I could work with them in some way, shape, or form, that would be like my next best bet after entrepreneurship, I guess.
Yeah. I think about like these kind of other dream jobs or these potential things. And I just feel like all those kind of positions just pay so little, like you could go get a marketing job and get well over six figures. But it's like, if you're going to be working with philosophers and scholars and doing all this kind of, it's going to be really meaningful, but it's going to be difficult to support a family on that salary.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But that's where it kind of comes back to, I'm the place that I'm at right now, if there are like any entrepreneurs listening, is trying to create that portfolio of a number of products and services at different varying price points. So it appeals to a wider range of people that all together are like an amalgamation of a portfolio that creates something that is both a livable income for you. So a replacement from a career, essentially income, and is also sustainable. Because that's the other hard part. It's got to be both of those, because that's the other hard part with entrepreneurship, is it can be so up and down with ebbs and flows. You can launch a new product and you have a big hit for a little bit, but then it falls off, and the next year, you're looking for the next thing. So it's got to be both livable and sustainable. And the way that I'm trying to do that now is with courses, launching a course for each Sloww stage. And hopefully that adds up to enough. And if it doesn't, maybe we're going to be having this conversation again, and I'll share all the lessons learned of, here's what worked, here's what didn't work. I'm now working this job over here. Who knows what will happen in the future, but yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious about a couple other things. Like, I'm curious about, the way I discovered you was through your Susan Kogruder ego development theory synthesis. And then I just was following you, and I saw your stuff, and I ended up like signing up. I think at the time it was like $50 for, or like $47 for like a lifetime membership. And you had all these like gated synthesis. And I was like, oh, this is a lot of great stuff. And then you had like the ebook or something. I was like, this is definitely worth it. I'm like, I want to see what he's, crafting here with these. So yeah, I basically discovered you through, searching through search engine optimization. So I guess I'm assuming that a lot of what helped you grow and build Sloww was just posting like crazy amounts, because you've done like an insane amount of posts on that site. So I'm guessing that you've gained a lot of traction through that. But yeah, I'm really curious, when was there a shift when you were like doing this and you're like, yeah, this is working, like this is actually going to work? Like, was there like a point where it was like going over the hump kind of point? And then kind of the follow up is, after how many years of running Sloww did you start to like finally monetize it, actually having a product?
So let's start with the second part of that. So in terms of monetization, I don't think the first thing I did for monetization was Sloww Premium. So what you had discovered, and that was in, I believe, 2020. And then I think that was early 2020. And then I think in later 2020, I released the IKIGAI ebook. So those were the first two ways that I tried to monetize, aside from, a donation button on the website and Patreon and things like that, which completely bombed for me. Didn't work at all. And this goes back to the volume, or as you said, scale question of, how do you start scaling things up? And if you're selling things at such a low price point, or even if you're getting a couple donations, but it's like $5 a month, but it's only like 5 people, obviously that's not going to do it. So this always surprises people when I talk about like how people discover Sloww. To your point, I think it's 75 to 80% of people discover Sloww how you did. So SEO, or search engine optimization, or primarily searching through Google, is how people enter the Sloww website, and they stumble upon it, and then they start clicking around, they sign up for the newsletter, and that's the most common way that people come in. This is what's most surprising to people when I tell them this. All of my social media channels combined, which is like Facebook, 2 Twitter accounts, Instagram, Threads now, LinkedIn, Pinterest, actually 2 LinkedIn accounts because I have my personal account too. I'm now going to start doing more on YouTube. All of that combined is under 5% of total Sloww site traffic. So this is the other thing that when entrepreneurs reach out to me asking for advice, they want to start something similar or do something in their own way or whatever it may be. The two things I tell them are like, don't spend a ton of time on social media. Like to be able to become like a viral hit on social media is so rare. It should not be the place where you put all of your eggs in one basket and try to get people to click through from social media to your website or however you're selling things through social media. It's just extremely hard. And that's because the algorithms have changed so much over the years that social media is pay to play now on all the big platforms. So organic reach is gone. You just can't reach like what you could do on Facebook back in, I remember my friend and I sold graphic t-shirts in college as an entrepreneurial business. And back then, this was in like the 2005 to 2007 timeframe. And back then you could have a group owner or admin on Facebook message their entire group with a mass message in like 1 second. So we would offer these group members a free t-shirt if they mass message their 20,000 members. So for like a $15 t-shirt, we got our website out to 20,000 people in 1 second. That's stuff you can't do anymore. It just doesn't work like that anymore. Like that was back when it was the wild west of social media. And that game is just over. So it's just way too hard to do that now. And now we don't know what's going to happen with SEO because of all the AI stuff.
AI, yeah.
Yeah. So now people are, instead of using Google, they're using something like Perplexity, which they're calling a Google replacement, where you're getting synthesized answers in an AI search result, which reduces the click through to a website or whatever it may be. So that's going to be really interesting to watch. Now, AI still has all these problems and you have to fact check it, even their syntheses and all of that, and where they're drawing their inputs from and their sources. But yeah, that's all of that has been a learning experience too, right? I didn't think that social media was going to be such a low driver of traffic. And you're always, as an entrepreneur, you're always making trade-offs. So if I'm spending time creating social media content, that means I'm not spending time learning, creating new articles, reading new books, writing book summaries, creating new products, whatever it may be. So that's the other thing you get really good at as an entrepreneur is like, just constantly editing how you're doing everything and deciding like, hey, this just isn't paying off. And it doesn't have to be paying off in a monetary aspect. It's like, it doesn't have to be paying off. It's not paying off in terms of traffic or interest or feedback or whatever it may be. However you're measuring it, it can be qualitative. And you got to make those tough calls, and you got to make them pretty quickly in terms of less social media time, more doing this stuff over here. But in terms of, I still don't know that I would say I know that Sloww has made it in any way, shape, or form, because it's still not, that livable, sustainable income. But I would say that, so a couple years in, I launched my first products, and then with Sloww Premium specifically, I started just getting this incredible feedback from people. There are people who, and I have testimonials on that landing page on the website, and I also have a testimonial, just a full testimonials page on the Sloww site, where people were reaching out to me and telling me that they had been in personal development for 10, 15, 25 years, and they had never come across anything like this, and that this was life transforming for them. So to me, that was the moment where I started to realize, oh, I'm onto something here. And I just have to figure out how I, can monetize this to a certain degree. I've always been really conservative in my monetization, to the point where people have said, hey, you got to charge more money for these things, because like even for premium, it was so low for so long, and it was lifetime access initially and things like that. So part of that was imposter syndrome. I hadn't identified yet as an entrepreneur. I thought I was like, I'm just this guy who's trying to, figure this out, and I'm winging it. And just like everybody else has to when they first get started. And I figured, well, if it's free or low priced, then I don't have to worry about any tough feedback or harsh criticism or anything like that. It was total imposter syndrome. But that kind of fades away and dissolves over time, and you kind of get used to it. And then sure enough, I feel like my career, which I quit 6 years ago this month, actually tomorrow, I think, is the 6-year anniversary of quitting my career.
Congrats.
Thank you. That feels like a lifetime ago now, where I was working in that, but it's only been 6 years. So it's amazing just how quickly you can get over those humps of like, am I really, a lot of people experience imposter syndrome as a writer. They're like, am I really a writer? Can I do this kind of thing? So the same thing happens with entrepreneurs, where you just don't identify as an entrepreneur initially. And you just kind of figure it out as you go, and that kind of fades away over time.
Yeah. So something interesting that's coming up for me right now, and this is, um, so, Sloww it synthesizes information from so many different areas. And, I think in recent years, you've really started leaning more into spirituality. Like I noticed you do a lot of synthesis around spirituality. But in general, there's just been so much from, money, meaning, intentional living, slow living. I mean, the topics more than me, but it's very kind of like just personal development. And I'm wondering if, like you've obviously are seeing traction and have seen traction, and you have a nice following, a nice subscription base, I imagine. And I know you have a lot of website traffic, so people are seeing your stuff. I'm wondering if there's some challenge with the fact that you have this kind of holistic approach, right? Like there's a challenge with having something that's very holistic. I find, at least for myself too, is that this kind of generalist, this comes back to being a generalist and a specialist. And this is something I struggle with, right? It's like I consider myself a generalist. Yeah, I lean into spirituality and psychology, and I have certain areas where I'm more well versed in, but I have this kind of generalist holistic lens, which I feel you also have. So I'm wondering if you feel like there's been challenges with monetizing because there's this generalist thing. And maybe also you could speak about like the community. Do you find like there's challenges with running the community, creating this cohesiveness, when it's so like wide ranging? There's so many topics. There might be some people that are coming to you that are interested in one thing, other people that are coming for another thing.
Yeah, that's such a good question, and something that I have thought about so much over the years. Because Sloww is called Sloww because of slow living, because that was a concept that I discovered during or soon after my existential crisis, because I had no idea that intentional living was even a thing. Right? I thought everybody did the lifestyle inflation thing of make more money, spend more money, get the bigger house, better car, that whole deal, because that's what I had been doing. And that's just a product of Western socialization, right? The whole living the dream thing. And I had never questioned that path up until age 30 when I had my crisis. So when I started with Sloww, I bought the domain because I was so inspired by all the intentional living stuff, specifically slow living. Because keep in mind, this is when I was working 60 to 80 plus hour weeks. I was just pure burnout, and I had no purpose in that burnout. And so I had discovered slow living, and then I bought the domain, and I emailed my dad, and I was like, it was on like Christmas Day, 2015 or something. And I was like, I've been so inspired by, I think I said like slow living, maybe I said downshifting and minimalism. I think maybe those were the only couple concepts I had discovered at that point, but it was such like a mental like frame shift for me that I knew there was something to it, because I couldn't find a lot of information online about it. And I was like, maybe there's something here. So I'm gonna buy the domain name. Maybe I'll do something with it in the future. Who knows? So all of the first, I don't know, 100 posts on the website are all intentional living. It's all about slow living, simple living, voluntary simplicity, minimalism, downshifting, digital minimalism, you name it. But then I hit the point. This was probably 2018. I remember thinking about this, exactly what you just asked. And coming from a marketing background, which we both have, it makes sense why you would ask this question, because I thought about the exact same thing, where I'm like, my interests and my own curiosity in terms of my personal development are starting to shift. They're starting to shift into more of the life purpose stuff. They're starting to shift into more of the psychological aspect behind things. And I had a specific time where I even remember where I was in my house at this time, where I was like, I have a choice to make. I can either, from a marketing perspective, go big on this slow thing from an intentional living perspective and just build that out and make it just be the single best resource on intentional living. Because I had been inspired by people like Joshua Becker, who runs Becoming Minimalist, and The Minimalists, those two guys, who's a Joshua Fields Milburn. So I saw those other people out there who were in the intentional living space, who were just going big on intentional living. And I was like, that's a decision I have to make. Am I just going to just stick with that? And if so, then do I have to create a second thing to house, all this other stuff that I'm interested in? And I ultimately decided this is where the idea that we started with of, purpose and meaning before monetization and profit. This is where this came back into play. And I just decided, you know what, I'm going to keep sharing what I am inquiring about, what I'm curious about, and just see what happens. I'm not going to limit it to this one thing. But I do feel like that has caused a bit of a struggle in terms of being so holistic that, if you scroll Twitter, you see people in their bios who have like the writing guy, the note-taking guy, the insert the blank guy, and they just have gone all in on one single thing. I mean, I even thought about this in terms of people like Shane Parrish, who is kind of like the mental models guy for Farnham Street, or Tim Ferriss, or any of these big names who Ryan Holiday, the Stoicism guy. Like, sure, they're doing some other things as well, but they are known for like one big major thing. And that, I feel like, is not something that I could put on, a pinpoint for me of like, well, what is my one thing? If I had to say one thing, it would be
synthesis.
Kind of that, right? Yeah,
synthesis, man. You're the synthesizer.
Yeah, it would either be that or like the art of living. It's kind of like the umbrella has to be the thing of the highest level that encapsulates everything. But to your point, that's hard, right? It's hard to be, when you're covering such a wide gamut and wide range of things, it's really hard to have that focus and be able to just, be known for that one thing when there's so many different things that are covered. On the flip side of that, I had someone just reach out to me recently, and he's like, hey, I just discovered you and subscribed to the email newsletter, and I'm just so excited that you cover all the things I'm interested in. And he listed out like minimalism, non-duality, all these different things. I'm like, that's amazing. Like, yeah, that's probably like, the exception versus the rule, but there are going to be some people that are taking that kind of generalist or holistic approach where they're interested in the whole thing. But
yeah, it's definitely the generalist lane it's tough, but it's, there's like this pressure to specialize, right? There's this pressure of like, especially when it's around like money and like creating a living, there's the pressure. And then it's like, it's almost like you're playing with that or maybe even like in like fighting it in some way. It's like, you gotta generalize, and it's like, no, I want to stay open. I have all these interests. And, you brought up some of these other people like Tim Ferriss, Shane Parrish, forgot who the other person you said, but like, even like they also had a very like, I see Tim Ferriss as being very generalist. He's done like, the 4-hour body, the 4-hour work week, the whatever the other book, the 4-hour chef. Like he's just goes after topic, which you do kind of like some of these other things, like these experiments, like these long experiments, which I kind of see that similarity in you with Tim Ferriss. Like Tim Ferriss would do all these like crazy experiments. And, but what I'm getting at is that I feel like personal development is such a like generalist, huge space. And then, we all kind of start out in that space, but over time you kind of start carving out your lane. So even like with Shane Parrish, like he's this personal development guy, but he's very into like decision making and like investing. And like he kind of carved out a certain specific lane. Like I used to be a part of the Farnham Street community, and like
yeah, me too.
yeah. So it attracts a certain type of person, and like he over time, you just kind of start gravitating to certain things, and I think that's happening with you also. Like the longer you do it, you kind of find like this something that's unique to your way of doing it. But I think it just takes a long time. And I think you're like starting to really step into that. Like I feel this sense, and I feel like for you, your lane is this synthesis. Like I think like what you're doing now with the course is like you have all these topics, but then it kind of comes back to like, this is what I'm really good at. Like, this is like my unique thing. At least that's what I see in what you're doing.
Yeah. And I think you're right in terms of synthesizing, or what you could say, like even how I describe my purpose now, I feel like I can sum it up in one sentence where I describe it as synthesizing lifelong learning that catalyzes deeper development. And
I
that
love
applies
that.
to both what I do for myself and also what I offer to others through all things slow. And that's kind of like the foundation of, so if you talk about those like 4 slow stages of intentional living, life purpose, mental mastery, and what I now call spiritual seeing, the foundation of all of that, the thing that's been consistent. So those stages have evolved over time, right? It's kind of like that's kind of like what follows Suzanne Cook-Reuter's ego development theory to a certain degree. But the foundation of all of that has been the lifelong learning, the synthesizing. And that's what leads to the developing. And so what I talk about in the course is like the whole system that I propose in the course is it follows this framework of questioning or inquiring to learning to developing. And developing can mean perspective transformation. It can mean adult development, vertical development, any of these human development, any of these words that are kind of synonymous with each other. But questioning leads to learning, leads to development. And that development of yourself leads to new questioning or ever deeper questioning, which leads to new learning, which leads to developing, which leads to ever deeper questioning, to learning, developing. And it's just this flywheel process that is never ending. And that's kind of the lifelong learning circle of just doing that over and over again. But to your point, it does take a long time to realize that and realize what you want to step into and focus on a little bit, because it's almost like a matter of reflecting on where you've been and being able to piece those breadcrumbs together to figure out where. And like for each of the courses that I launched, they'll all be grounded in my personal story in terms of like how I did it, how I experienced it. But then you'll get all the core concepts of everything that already exists in the world. I mean, when it comes to like learning and all of that, like I created this little wiki microsite called the Synthesis Mind that pairs with the course that has like 200 concepts in it, from learning theory concepts to developmental concepts to reading to note taking, like all these different things. Those concepts already existed, right? But they only really make sense when you share them in context of the personal lived experience story of how it all plays out. So then I'll do the same thing for intentional living and life purpose and the other courses in terms of grounding it in my personal story and how I actually did it. That's what makes it practical and resonates with people, the human aspect of everything. And then all the, the theory side of things, or the conceptual side, is all shared as kind of like, connected concepts to what you're talking about from a personal perspective.
Yeah, I definitely want to circle back to dive a little bit more into the synthesizer course. And before we do that, maybe we could touch a couple of other subjects. And before we kind of shift from money and meaning, and I mean, we've kind of been synthesizing and weaving different topics into that. But yeah, like what was bubbling up for me is I'm just imagining somebody at home listening to this. And let's just imagine they have like a 9 to 5. They kind of, a lot of their time is taken up with work. They have kids. Let's imagine they don't live in the middle of nowhere like you. they live in a big city like me, right? And they feel kind of stuck. They feel like maybe what they're doing, they either don't like what they're doing, or maybe they like it, but it just takes up a lot of time. So they don't necessarily have that kind of freedom. Or, maybe they they like what they're doing, but they want to step into entrepreneurship. Right now, they have a 9 to 5. They're kind of so they're kind of, they feel kind of confined. Like they feel like they're still on a certain schedule, or they're working for somebody else. Imagining that was your situation, right? Like kids, big city, in this 9 to 5 job. It's 2024. What would be some steps that you would start taking? Like what would be some advice you would give to a person that's in this position, given that they want to move into entrepreneurship? They want to align what's meaningful with them with money. They need to be able to provide for their family at the same time. What are some what are some steps you would tell them to take, or advice you would give?
Yeah, another great question. So there are a couple different ways to approach this one. The first one is I would still start with figuring out purpose. So go through all of that know thyself work and start figuring out how your mind works psychologically. Figure out what you think your purpose may be. You might not be able to articulate it in a sentence. I don't think I could articulate my purpose in a sentence for like 5 years post-crisis, maybe even longer. That's been a pretty recent development for me in the last year or two, to be able to actually say it in a sentence. But what you will figure out pretty quickly is you'll figure out directionally where you want to go. Like you'll figure out what resonates with you. You want to go this way or that way. This doesn't resonate. This does resonate. You'll start figuring out what you're passionate about, where your energy naturally like regenerates when you do it. That's what I call the difference between work and play. Work is what is energy depleting for you, whereas play is what's energy regenerating. So, for instance, at the end of a work day at my marketing career, I would just be completely drained, exhausted, like just dead. And then at the end of a day now, I'm still ramping up, in the evening of like, man, I could just keep going, I could still keep working on stuff. It's a complete opposite. It's a complete flip. Even though what people on the outside would look at what I do as work for them, it feels like play to me, which is another like Naval Ravikant thing. But so in terms of going on this path, the first thing is to figure out purpose. So, and I'll kind of ground this again in my own experience of different steps you could take or different, forks on the path. So figure out purpose first. That's what I did or started doing during my cognitive dissonance years. And what you will figure out is that on one hand, you might figure out that your purpose could actually be leveraged in your current job or career. So maybe that means and maybe this, because we also have to keep in mind that a bunch of people just don't want to be entrepreneurs. They don't want to, this lifestyle doesn't appeal to them. They just don't have interest in it. However, they still want to do something purposeful and meaningful. So for those people, there's a concept called job crafting, where you're starting to figure yourself out and you are designing your either current role in your job or your career to be crafted more purposefully or meaningfully to what you've now figured out about yourself. So it kind of relieves that cognitive dissonance. So some people will figure out that, hey, I'm actually at the right company, but not in the right role. And so they want to shift roles. Some people will figure out that I'm in the right career, but not in the right company. So they'll shift companies. Some people will figure out, actually, I need to have a career change, but I still want to maintain a career. I still want to make my living and income that way. I don't want to be an entrepreneur or whatever. So they'll job craft by just shifting careers. So you can change roles, companies, careers, all of those things to make things more meaningful and purposeful to what you figured out about yourself. And that might be enough for a lot of people. Job crafting or career crafting might be it. For the people who want to take the entrepreneurial step, you might have to kind of do what I did, where you're still working your full-time job. Maybe you try to find something that's more meaningful as, a bridge or stopgap thing of, I'm going to do this for a limited amount of time, but I want to find something more purposeful and meaningful. So I'm going to go work a different job or career for a limited amount of time while I'm trying to build my entrepreneurial business on the side. So some people will opt to do that, which obviously provides a huge safety net. Yes, you don't have all of the same flexibility and free time and things to be able to go all in on your entrepreneurial thing initially, but it gives you that safety net of the income and the benefits and things coming in while you're working on something else. And you can try and fail at multiple things before you figure out what is going to work for you on the entrepreneurial side and then go all in on that. So there are so many different ways to kind of test the waters of this lifestyle. But I think we're still at the very beginning of people who are now starting to question, how do I find purpose and meaning in what I do? And in a lot of cases, they're questioning that because they feel like they don't currently have it. So some form of, crafting of job, career, company, whatever it may be, is probably going to be needed for a lot of people. And I think this is also why, if you've heard of Paul Millard's book, The Pathless Path, where he essentially quit his high-paying consulting career and he didn't know what he wanted to do. So at least that's the difference. I actually have a premium post on the Sloww website where I compare his entire book and his personal story with my own. And there are obviously, 80% overlaps, but there is a 20% difference of, I knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to give this Sloww thing a shot. That was already figured out for me by the morning after I quit my career, I started working on Sloww. So, and had already launched it quitting my career. Whereas Paul, when he left his career, he didn't know what he wanted to do yet, which is why he called it the pathless path. He had to go explore the world and figure things out and get to know himself that way, and then kind of go into the next step. So in that book, his book became a viral hit. I think he sold over 50,000 copies of it in the last couple of years or something. So obviously, when we're talking about cultural zeitgeists, that is in the zeitgeist right now of, people are looking for something more purposeful, and they may quit their careers even without knowing what that purpose is yet. So there are a million different ways to do it. But yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. As you were talking, I was thinking about Paul Millard because it's something you were saying, like, was reminding me of like something I've read of his or heard from him. So yeah, he's somebody I'm interested to speak about. And like, I was checking out his stuff and he seems to be very well versed and well read on this topic of work, like how to do good work. Like, so yeah, I'm very interested about that topic. So he's somebody I'm looking to potentially having a conversation with in the future. And I also wanted to double click on, you mentioned your IKIGAI 2.0 ebook, which I've read years ago. And I think that's a great resource. I actually think I might have read it right before I started this podcast. It was probably a little while before I started the podcast, but I think I remember doing a lot of the work, like the questions and the stuff you had there, and just really thinking about purpose. And it was really helping me gain more clarity on like what direction I want to move and where I want to put my energy in. So I think that's a great resource. I'm going to definitely link that in the show notes. Yeah, there's so many more topics that I wanted to touch on with you. Um, I'm thinking maybe we could touch on ego development theory, uh, because I feel like there's different overlaps that I feel like you and me have. Like, it's interesting. We've both come from, have marketing backgrounds. It's interesting too. I saw you like talking about like your strengths, and I think it was like the strengths finder. We have two of the same strengths. So you have learner and input, and so do I. So that makes sense. Seeing how you're so interested in personal growth and like doing the synthesis and putting that together. I'm like, like I started kind of doing some book summaries in the same way as you, and I'm like, I could kind of see myself doing similar things that you do, but I think you're way more obsessed with like putting information together, and so there's also differences in how I look at the world and like predisposition. I think you're an introvert, right? Like you're more introverted. I remember you see, so I'm like super extroverted. So there's some differences, but yeah, like the overlaps of like ego development theory, that's definitely been something that's impacted my life. And you've written a lot about that. You synthesize about that. I've had Susan Cook Gruder on my podcast early on, like episode 3. And then maybe we could also talk about like what Nora Bateson spoke about, and like how she's against developmental stage theories. I found it interesting that as somebody who's into developmental stage theories, you actually synthesized her perspectives. So what do you find intriguing about EDT, specifically ego development theory? How has learning it impacted your life? Maybe we could start there.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm a huge fan, obviously, of Suzanne Cook-Reuter and ego development theory, and one of the reasons why is because I didn't discover it until I was years into this journey. So this is like multiple years post crisis, already directionally figuring out purpose to a certain degree, going full time on Sloww, and then I can't actually even remember when I found it, but it's one of those things where those moments when you discover something and it articulates things in words where you intuitively already know it or already knew it, but you didn't have the words to be able to say it. It was one of those moments for me where I was like, it's like those goosebump, like aha moment things where it was like, oh my gosh, like this is exactly what I feel like, the journey I've been on so far in terms of this whole personal development journey. This kind of explains it. This gives me words to articulate it finally. So there was that aspect. The other aspect was that a lot of human development theories, actually just recently read Ken Wilber's Integral Psychology. And at the back of that book and like the appendix, he's got like multiple graphs and charts of over 100 human development models and theories, Suzanne Cook-Reuter's and Jane Levenger's ego development being one of them. But EDT has always been the one that has resonated with me the most because I agree with her that, and once you get into spirituality, you really start to see this, right? Because everything hinges on the sense of self, the sense of identification, the self-inquiry questions and things like that. And everything else seems to come as a byproduct. So The other reason EDT resonated with me was because, there's so many of those 100 other theories that Ken Wilber talks about were theory first. Like the person came up with a theory and then they tried to validate it and prove it. Whereas Suzanne Cook-Reuter worked for many years, if not decades, in terms of collecting the data, like 10 to 15,000 plus maturity assessment profile assessments. And then she analyzed the data, which allowed her to see the patterns and the structure of what she then turned into the stages. So it was data first, or all the empirical data and research first, which then was a byproduct of the theory. So that seems to be more rare. So it kind of holds up a little bit in terms of, or a lot of it more in terms of being a theory that's grounded in real data and research. So that was a great validation point. But I was kind of already sold on it just based on like, this matches my personal experience, and there's nothing that's more powerful than something matching your own lived experience. And then I realized, because I found it years into my journey, it couldn't have been discovering the map and then trying to live to the map. I had discovered the map later, and it just matched the path I had already been on. So there was no like self-fulfilling prophecy. That's a problem with some of these things, is like, you get the map, like people talk about this with integral theory. Like Suzanne actually calls this aboutism, where you learn about the theory and then you think you're at the highest level just because you learned about the theory. But so there was no aboutism at play, because I've discovered it later, after I had already gone through some of this stuff, and just lived and learned the hard way. But obviously a huge fan of her work. I can't wait for her, masterpiece book to come out. I'll read it the day it comes out. She's working on 2, I think, a child's book, a fable. And then one that I think is just going to be like the ultimate synthesis and everything, like a textbook essentially of ego development theory, which I'll read the day it comes. I'll drop whatever I'm doing and read the day it comes out.
You'll have the synthesis by the end of the week.
Yeah, right. That's the goal for sure. So obviously, all of that being said, is a big fan of her work. It all resonates with my lived experience and it all makes sense. So that's why I was so interested when Nora Bateson's Facebook post went viral of stage theories are BS. It's something like I think on Facebook, it was like as simple as stage theories are BS. And that may have been it, period. And it got hundreds, if not thousands of comments. And then she posted it on Twitter and said something similar. And then I think she said they're colonial as hell and they've got to go. Something like that.
Yeah.
And so whenever, this is just kind of a general theme for me, whenever there's a perspective that is the complete flip of what I feel like resonates, I investigate it, because I'm like, am I missing something? Am I not seeing the whole picture? Like, this is kind of the generalist perspective, right? Or trying to be holistic, or trying to do like the whole dialectic thing of thesis, antithesis, synthesis of, what is Nora's perspective? I want to understand what it is. But in order to understand it, I had to read like hundreds of the comments and her responses on her Facebook post and her tweet. She also went on some YouTube discussions. So I watched a few of those. And I synthesized the entire thing. And I initially launched it as a public post because I wanted people to be able to see it and get feedback on it, because this was a big topic like a year or two ago when she initially talked about all this. And sure enough, Nora read the post and left a comment saying, wow, this is quite comprehensive. and you've covered a lot of things here. But I went into the whole thing thinking, I don't know that I'm going to learn a lot from doing this. I'm already pretty sold on these stage theory things. Like, I don't know, we'll see what happens. But it was, I will tell you, like the best use of time ever, because I got such a well-rounded perspective on how she thinks. Contextually, transcontextually, she calls it abductively. She has like all these different concepts in terms of how she describes what she does, and then she goes into colonialism, industrialism, eugenics, all of these things. We can talk about like human socialization and conditioning. All these things are at play, right? And then this also gets into free will, because she doesn't think, the whole hero's journey story. I think she has something where she talks about like the hero's journey is really the story of like the tribe or the village, because the hero is created from their environment that allows the hero to be a byproduct of, their nature and nurture and everything else. So she talks quite a bit about agency and things like that. But it was well worth the time. I learned a ton from her perspective. And what's fascinating is her and Nora and Suzanne had a conversation. I don't know that
Really?
they talked. I don't. Yeah, it's on YouTube. I don't know that they talked about this stuff specifically, but
They should have. That would have been the thing to talk
yeah,
about.
that's what I'd like to see on like a presidential debate is like Nora and Suzanne debating stage
Yeah,
theories.
yeah,
But
yeah.
but my guess is that Nora and Suzanne would probably agree on 80 to 90% of everything. And then it's
Yeah.
like these nuanced things, right? Nora, I don't want to misquote Nora. There's tons of stuff in that premium synthesis, but a lot of it's about context, right? You can't say that something is higher or better or follow someone else's map or whatever it may be. But I would guess that they align on 80 to 90% of how they think. And then it's just some of these nuanced things because I feel like stage theory does take context into play. There is something about the Western human mind that seems to go through some of these stages to a certain degree. I don't think it applies necessarily to the Eastern mind, which is
Yeah.
something I'm learning more about in terms of like Advaita Vedanta and exploring. I've been exploring like Swami Sarvapriyananda and Swami Vivekananda and Ramakrishna and their thinking. And we could talk about that a little bit. That's fascinating in terms of why and how the Western mind views themselves as like a separate self and why the Eastern mind doesn't have that problem. And so like the whole idea of agency and free will is not an issue to the Eastern mind because they view themselves as a soul or spirit first that has a body mind. So you're identified with awareness. This is just general like spirituality at this point. But the Western mind views themselves as a body mind first. And therefore, they identify with the mind. They think they are their mind. So all that, it gets pretty fascinating. But you can kind of see I'm already like going on this tangent of how this connects over here. Ego development theory, stage theories connect to Nora Bateson, connect over here to somehow I got to Advaita Vedanta. So that's just how the synthesizing mind works, I guess. You start connecting all these dots and ultimately they all have to fit together, right? Because it's like you have one singular, holistic, interconnected mind. And so if something doesn't fit, you got to figure out, well, what is off? How are you not seeing the full picture? Or is there a paradox at play? Are there contradictions at play? Can both things be true at the same time? These are all kind of questions you're asking yourself as you're trying to understand, well, stage theories resonate, but Nora Bateson thinks they're BS. So how do you hold both perspectives at the same time and understand where they're coming from? But it was well worth the time. I learned a ton, and I agree with a ton of what Nora says.
So I'm curious then, how, if in any way, did doing the Nora Bateson synthesis change how you look at developmental theory? You mentioned the whole East and West, which in reading that, like I would agree, like a lot of Western psychology, and she gives a lot of examples, like it maps to Western minds, right? It doesn't necessarily translate. But I'm curious if there were other points or other things that you agreed with, and maybe there's things that she said that you didn't agree with. I think she goes too far on certain things, but we could talk more about that. But I'm curious, like where she was like pulling you into her view, and you're like, yeah, I agree, and where it was like, okay, well, she sees things from that angle, I see it from this angle.
I think what she really helped me focus more on was the kind of critical importance of context. You always have to take context into play in terms of everything. And I kind of was already there because I'm so big on like the lottery of birth, in terms of, and I think what helps is when you get to like EDT, it's like stage 5 or 5, 6, where you're construct aware. I kind of view construct awareness as synonymous with witness consciousness and spirituality. In terms of you now are able to view or observe or watch or witness your mind as an object. So you are no longer identified with your mind. You're now, you could say, at a higher level of being able to watch or witness your mind as an object. So you as subject has changed from being identified with your thoughts and your ideas and concepts and your mind in general. And you're now more identified. It's still duality, but you're identified with awareness, essentially, being able to watch your mind. That to me is synonymous with construct awareness. You're able to watch your mind at play. You're able to watch your ego make meaning, make the stories, do whatever. And you understand that there are stories and fictional to a certain degree and all of that. But so Nora really helped me in terms of context, in terms of, and connect that dot with like lottery of birth, understanding, if someone's born, and I've watched so much lottery of birth stuff. Like I need to, at some point, I'm going to turn all of this into an ebook of like lottery of birth, moral responsibility, free will. Because it's just such a fascinating topic to me, and I've I've put like 40 or 50 posts on the website out about it, but it all makes sense to me. And to me, that's where kind of like all the dots connect and they all hold together. And so being able to hold Nora's perspective with Suzanne's perspective, they don't conflict for me. It kind of makes sense. I feel like the Western mind can go through some of these stages if you want to see them as stages, but at the same time, Nora has this idea of like, imagine a deer in a forest and antlers fall off onto the ground, and that antlers become a home for insects and bacteria and fungi, and then that decomposes and all this. So she talks about like, where's the edge of the deer? Where does the deer begin and end? Where can you say like, and so she relates that to agency and like the individual and like the separate self and like these types of things where, and here's what's interesting is Nora isn't really on board with free will. She told me in like comments on the post, she doesn't think like the concept of like individual agency doesn't make a lot of sense because the self is created by others. Everything is in its context with its environment. You can't remove anything ever from its context of its environment. So it's kind of like, where's the edge of the deer? Where's the edge of the individual? Because the individual is the product of the environment and everything else. And so all of that makes sense to me. And then I also ran my free will hypotheses and theories by Suzanne. And she's like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And she would be on board with that. And she doesn't think that like, pure soul, SOLE, into pure soul, separate individual free will makes a lot of sense. So both Suzanne and Nora agree on that. So yeah, but Nora just helped me out. I do think I agree with you and a lot of other people do too, in terms of, you can push all this too far in terms of the colonialization, how epistemology works, how we get socialized and conditioned. And it's just one of those things where like, yes, like question everything in terms of how your mind works. But again, a lot of people, based on ego development theory, 80% of people aren't at the point where they can question their own mind because they can't yet see their own mind as an object. So that's where, it gets a little bit tougher, but yeah, I don't know if I answered your question there or not.
Yeah. And maybe I'll say a couple of things. I think Nora needs to do what she's doing, and like there needs to be somebody that's speaking to what she's speaking to. And I think a lot of the things that she says, like at least in that synthesis, it was like, developmental theories are dangerous, or like measuring people is dangerous. And I would put a little more nuance in that. It's potentially dangerous, right? Like all of this stuff can potentially get dangerous. Like if you take developmental stage too literally, or you take it too far, you take anything too literally, it can become dangerous, right? But there's also this thing of like, we should never measure, we should never label, we should never objectify, right? Like there is no objective reality, so we should never objectify or we should never measure. But then it's like, how do you do science? How do you determine these kind of the things that we need? Like there is this need to be able to use these tools and these lenses and these frames. They could be used in a helpful way, but like anything, they could be misused. They could become, and I think that's where the nuance, like for me, the way she holds these things, maybe she needs to, right? Like maybe there has to be somebody that's, kind of shouting this from the top of the mountain, like, this is dangerous. We need to stop doing this because this leads to colonialism or eugenics, right? But to me, there's a nuance that I don't know if she's touching on. And I feel like people that skillfully hold developmental stage theories, that understand them on a deep level, they hold them with nuance. So that's kind of like, I feel like that's the contention there for me.
Yeah, and I completely agree too. And I think you see the difference too in terms of like Suzanne Cook-Reuter is just such a wonderful human. And any conversation with her, you get that nuance. You get all the subtlety. You get all the caveats. You get all the, yes, but make sure you're keeping this in mind. You get all of that. And then you can kind of contrast that with like the phase and like the early 2000 or whatever, when everybody like integral theory was taking off and everybody was trying to force fit integral into their company or business or whatever it may be. And it just bombed. Like it just didn't work because it was developmental theory basically force fit into something where the people weren't ready for it yet. Or it wasn't recognizing that people are at different stages and are going to interpret things differently. So all of that. So that's kind of the difference, right? Between nuance on the one side versus a one size fits all on the other side. And you can see how not the same stage theory, but how stage theories in general can work over here, but not work over there.
Yeah. So, we've been already kind of touching on this because ego development theory does kind of relate to this concept of the self. And, another topic we're both deeply steeped in is the meta crisis. And you actually created a really cool resource called metacrisis.org, which includes different resources, people, and projects working on the meta crisis. You also created a synthesis proposing that the meta crisis is a me crisis. And, I think this whole topic of identity and how it relates to how we function in the world is very interesting. Can you kind of unpack this idea and how you see the meta crisis being a me crisis?
Yeah, so let's start with the definition of meta crisis first. So meta obviously means like of or about something. So meta crisis would mean like the crisis of crises. So you can imagine all the crises at play, and everybody's talking about different crises or multiple crises, right? So you've got the political crisis, the environmental crisis, the educational crisis, the technological crisis, like you name it, right? The artificial intelligence crisis. So all of those crises kind of combined is at least how I refer to the term meta crisis in this sense. Other people are using terms like polycrisis now, omnicrisis I think is being used, or other people have different definitions of meta crisis. But just for definition and terminology purposes, that's how I refer to the term meta crisis. So the question then is like, what has led to all of this? The meta crisis, kind of like we started talking about at the beginning in relation to like money and meaning. The meta crisis is something that I've been following really since the terminology started bubbling up. It was one of those things, again, where it didn't have a name initially. And then at some point, meta crisis got slapped on like this corner of the internet of people who were interested in all of these different topics. And actually on that resource that you mentioned on metacrisis.org, I have a page of hashtags, which basically is an amalgamation of all the people and all the projects and how they, in their own words, are describing what they're working on. And there are like over 250 hashtags on that page, maybe over 350 now. So you can see the huge range of people that are in the meta crisis space or in adjacent spaces and things like that. So it's a big range of people. But what I wanted to do and what I did over the years this is another project or like just side interest that I feel like I've developed over the years, where maybe 3 years ago, I wrote a post about, it wasn't specifically about the meta crisis, but it was about, humanity's ultimate challenge. And the conclusion that I came to at that point was that humanity's ultimate challenge is ourselves. And I went into psychological development. I went into technology. I went into work, relationship with work, 5 different areas in that post. And since then, it's just something that's been incubating and simmering over time. That's how a lot of things work with synthesizing, is like you've got all these dots connected in your head, and then unconsciously, they'll connect and an aha moment will happen or something. But most recently, what I've come to the conclusion of is that the meta crisis is a me crisis, meaning that in Daniel Schmachtenberger's terms, the generator function or the root cause or the most urgent and important problem, or however you want to phrase it, to me is ourselves. In other words, our quote unquote selves, our sense of self. And this ties back to all the ego development theory stuff and everything else in terms of what I've seen. When people talk about a lot of this stuff, they usually start with technology is outpacing wisdom. So there's usually something around that. Ken Wilber talks about this in a bunch of his integral theory books, and he actually says this is common, that technology runs ahead of everything else, and then everything else kind of catches up. So technology runs ahead of economics, I think he says. Technology runs ahead of culture. Obviously, that means technology runs ahead of people's personal development. And then there's kind of like a catch-up that has to happen, or a gap that has to be closed. And Daniel Schmachtenberger obviously talks a ton about the technological aspects, about catastrophic risks and things like that. But I see all of that as the superficial problem. That's the problem you can see. If you're just looking out at what's going on, you would say, oh yeah, like there's a technological problem. Obviously now all this stuff with AI and AGI is kind of at the forefront. I see that as the superficial problem. The deeper problem to me, if you do like a 5 whys, like root cause analysis or whatever, like why is that? Why? To me, it is all a byproduct. All that superficial stuff is a byproduct of ourselves, our sense of self. And this gets into ego development theory, where 80%, according to Suzanne Cook-Reuters research, 80% of Western humans are still pre what she calls watershed.
Yeah.
So they're still in conventional levels of development, post-conventional development. And that means that if someone is in the conventional levels of development, which is what the Western world essentially socializes humans to be, like Suzanne says, stage 4, conventional stage 4 is the Western stage of adult development. That is like, you are a self-made human, and you have sole responsibility for yourself, and you have free will and agency, and it's up to you. And if you don't make it, it's your own fault. And there's praise and blame and all of these things associated with it. That all of those things are a byproduct of that sense of self. And 80% of Western humans are still there. So to me, that is the thing. Like, I don't feel like the world has to go to the end, like the transcendent end, and everybody has to be enlightened. I just feel like you have to get a bigger tipping point past that watershed into the initial stages of post-conventional development. And that's where that first stage of post-conventional development, stage like 4 or 5 or whatever it is in EDT, that's called like the self-questioning stage. So if only 20% of people have reached the stage of self-questioning, being able to question, observe their own mind, and therefore question it, reflect upon it, and all of that, then it all makes sense, right? It makes sense why all these other things are byproducts of people who still think that they are their mind. They are their thoughts, they are their ideas, and they are self-made, and all these types of things. Suzanne even told me that the whole lottery of birth concept won't resonate with people until the post-conventional stages, because they don't view it that way. They still think they're self-made. They did it all by themselves. They pulled themselves up by their own bootstraps. And Suzanne, she acknowledges and empathizes with that, because we've all gone through that stage where we thought that. But then, a lot of people, 80% of people still haven't reached that stage where they can question that and realize, oh, that's not seeing the holistic, bigger picture.
Yeah. I'm very much interested in this movement from conventional into post-conventional meaning making. And, I've been writing a Substack, and basically it's like the theory and practice of human transformation through a post-conventional lens. And that's what I'm very interested, because I seen that in my own journey. And I seen, like, for me, a lot of that happened through using psychedelics, and that kind of made me see through the sense of the self being a solid self, or, me being completely responsible for my life. And then just seeing, like, how moving into that, there's so many different challenges. Whereas before, you're kind of like in this mainstream and you're kind of just doing what most people are doing. And then you move outside into the fringes. And now you're like, there are these environments and communities where, these practices and these ways of being are cultivated. But still, when you're moving around through the world, most of the people you're going to be interacting with are still functioning through this way. So a lot of the stuff that becomes interesting to you, or the things you're thinking about, or, like the concept, like you could entertain a concept like the lottery of birth. For some other people, they're just like, what is this talking about? Like, what is this? Like trying to explain to somebody that the mind is not confined to the brain, that haven't moved into that space or haven't had some of these experiences. It's just like they can't, they still think, they completely are convinced that all consciousness is a byproduct of just neurons firing, right? When you have certain experiences, you're like, consciousness is a mystery, and there's no way that it could be confined to, like, you can't see that, right? So you start opening to other possibilities of, like, whereas, like, the materialistic view was very, like, evident, like, oh yeah, this is definitely, like, we're just kind of separate beings and consciousness arises from the brain. And then you have certain experiences like, oh no, this is, there's no way. Like, there's no way. That doesn't seem like the most, it doesn't seem like that's the most true explanation of what's happening here.
Yeah. And the thing that I always come back to is, like, whatever stage that is like your center of gravity, as Suzanne Cook-Reuter calls it, like you're always spanning multiple stages, like 3 or more at any given time, but you have a center of gravity. You are seeing the world from that stage. So your sense of self has changed, and therefore how you see everything has changed. How you interpret the words truth and love and beauty and goodness and things like that have changed. So I describe it as, like, and so much of spirituality I just describe as how you see. It's like, I describe it as like beyond mind. I describe it as seeing, but a lot of it is like seeing beyond the separate self. But how you see, if you're at a post-conventional stage, you can see more or more holistically. But someone who's still in a conventional stage can't yet see it. It's not their fault that they can't see it, but this is why people are talking past each other. And this is why people are interpreting things differently. Even philosophy, I just, this occurred to me recently, like how someone reading a spiritual book is a psychological act, right? That's reading is happening, on the level of your mind. All of it is pointers, right, to beyond mind. But when you're reading a book, that is a psychological act, and it's going to be interpreted by your level of psychological development. So rereading a book that I read, 5 to 10 years ago, spiritual book, I'm going to interpret it completely differently. It's like no one steps in the same river twice because it's not the same river, you're not the same person. No one steps in the same mind twice because it's not the same mind and you're not the same person. So, but all of this is fascinating to me. It all makes so much sense because every human has to go through socialization, but there's an order of events. Like you can't realize you've been socialized until you've already been socialized. So the socialization, there is no skipping socialization. It's just in the Western world, we aren't really taught or told that, hey, you went through human socialization. This is how you learned language. This is how you learned all the ideas you have in your head. Like at least Daniel Schmachtenberger admits, he's like, I think in, or this was someone else's quote, but like, I think in a language that I didn't invent, it's so all of these types of things. Alan Watts has some good stuff on that too. But the same is with identification. So like by the time you realize you have an identity, you already have an identity.
Yeah.
So it's like the socialization has to happen first. The identity has to be formed first. Yeah. And this gets into things why, the debate of like ego death versus ego development. Whereas like Suzanne Cook-Reuter's model ends with like transcendence or like witnessing presence or anything like that. But you don't get rid of the ego necessarily. It's like a transcend and include, like Wilber kind of thing, or development is envelopment, versus an ego death thing, which is why I think so many people go wrong where they try to like force an ego death at a lower stage of ego development. And that's what I think leads to things like derealization, depersonalization, psychosis, like all of those things where the mind can go wrong. It's like this paradox of you have to develop a strong ego before you can transcend it. But that's all fascinating to me too, in terms of like, and it's the difference between Wilber's states and stages. Like you can have a spiritual experience, but might not be able to integrate it because it's experienced from a lower stage of development. All of that stuff seems to make sense now. But again, these are just pieces of the puzzle that over years start to come into more clarity and picture over time.
Yeah. So, you're talking about, you did mention like spirituality and like pointing at the moon and a lot of, you've been creating a lot of content around that. And, I know I, like many others, are susceptible to over consuming information, especially around spirituality, to the point where it can actually become a barrier to our direct realization, because now we have all these ideas of what spirituality or enlightenment or awakening is. How do you think about balancing knowledge consumption, and particularly around spirituality, with actual spiritual practice or meditation? How do you think about that?
So the first thing in terms of just balancing like knowledge, information and knowledge consumption in general is that for me, the learning is always in service of the living. This is one of the benefits of my existential crisis is that, everything that I do and everything that I've always done for Sloww has been me trying to figure myself out in my own life first and foremost. And so I wasn't a big reader growing up. And like that's surprising for people to hear because I'm like a professional reader in a sense now, but I never would have guessed that, growing up. But so for me, it's like I almost describe it as like the like training ground and the playing field are like one and the same. Like what I'm learning, I'm applying to my life or testing it out, or like we talked about, like weighing contradictions or paradoxes of, hey, that doesn't align with what I've been thinking. I need to look into that. All of that is happening in like real time in terms of the learning and the living are like a constant feedback loop. It's that whole loop of like questioning, learning, developing flywheel constantly at play. So for me, I feel like I haven't had the balance problem of, too much information consumption versus, just getting lost in the information for the sake of the information, which can be like a form of procrastination or bypassing even. You could use a number of different words for it. But in terms of spirituality, so this gets interesting when it comes to spirituality, because again, spirituality isn't something that I said. I was raised Catholic. I went to a Jesuit high school, but I wouldn't have called myself spiritual ever in life, until recently. And actually, I met my wife, and she got me back into like non-denominational Christianity to a certain degree. But I still wouldn't have called myself spiritual until like recently, because I didn't even really understand what that word meant, or how spirituality was different from religion, or the whole idea of the finger pointing at the moon, or the idea that there's beyond mind in general, or seeing beyond mind. So there are two sides to this. The first one is that one of the things I feel like I could call myself as like a spiritual translator. So this is on the level of the mind, where, and you see this all the time with spirituality writings, especially because you're talking about East and West, and you're talking about different time periods. So geographically different and generationally different. You have to do a lot of psychological translation in terms of, hey, this author over here is using the word mind. This one's using consciousness. This one's using lowercase mind. This one's using uppercase M mind, or lowercase s self, uppercase s self. But this person's using the word self, like this person over here uses the word mind. And so initially, and this is something that just comes through exposure to all these different things, and also just a matter of doing it a lot. You become a better spiritual translator over time, where you can now understand, you can read someone and say, okay, I understand immediately how this person is using this terminology, and it compares and contrasts to how this person over here is saying this with either the same or different words. So I actually cover this in the Synthesizer course. It's called Creating Common Ground and Coming to Terms. So Mortimer Adler, who wrote the famous book, How to Read a Book, talks about the importance of doing this. If you're doing the highest level of reading, which is called syntopical reading in his terminology, that's when you're reading across books and across authors. In order to synthesize those, you have to be able to create common ground between the authors. And it's up to you as the reader to be able to do that. The author's not going to do that. The book's already been written. They might be long gone. So it's up to you to be able to understand and interpret the words correctly. And until you can do that, you're not going to be able to synthesize across authors and books. So this to me comes into play in spirituality more than any other subject area, because the terminology can just be so different in terms of how people are using terms and words and things like that. So that's the first side of it, is being able to create common ground and come to terms with all these authors, and be almost like a spiritual translator. What that allows you to do, I'm seeing balloons on my side. I don't know if you're seeing that.
Yeah. No worries. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I liked what I said. is celebrate spiritual translation. But the second side of that is what that allows you to do, because that's all on the psychological level of the mind, all the translation, coming to terms, creating common ground. That allows you to create a better map. That gives you a better finger pointing at the moon. So instead of having, what are there, 3,000 different religions and sub-religions and subgenres and things like that, instead of having to go through every single one or understand that, you're synthesizing things on the fly of, like right now I'm doing something I call Wise Walk, where I'm exploring a different spiritual teacher every one of the 52 weeks of the year. So right now we're 20 weeks into that. And so I've now listened to 30 minutes a day, so 3.5 hours per teacher per week. So I've now listened to 20 different spiritual teachers, some I had no exposure to prior to doing this. And I'm now understanding, and even the people that are doing it with me are like, hey, I'm starting to see some of the same themes. They're talking about the same patterns. They might be using different words, but they're talking about the same stuff. So your map is starting to get really, really good. And you're able to then leverage that in terms of going beyond mind and seeing beyond mind and all of that. So it's a huge help in terms of how all of that plays out. And this gets us back to ego development theory, because both Suzanne Cook-Reuter and her colleague Beena Sharma, who runs the Vertical Development Academy and does a lot with like polarity thinking and things, they talk about how horizontal learning or horizontal development, just the act of learning, is a catalyst for vertical development. So again, we're back to the questioning, learning, developing, process and flywheel of how all that plays out. And development is just another word for perspective transformation. And perspective transformation is just another term for how to see, or how you see the world and yourself in the world. So again, it's all the dots kind of connect and play out. But yeah, the spiritual translation has been a big thing for me. I wouldn't have understand any of this early on, but it's just come through a lot of quantity. The quality comes through the quantity.
Yeah, I'm curious. Have you heard of relational practices?
Mm-hmm. A little bit, yeah. I'm probably not as well versed in them as you are, but yeah. Are you talking about things kind of like authentic relating and circling and things like that? Yeah. I'm only a newbie in that kind of stuff, but yeah.
Yeah. So why I bring that up is because I've personally found that to be a very vital part of my own development and in my own transformative path. And like prior to engaging with those practices, a lot of my self-development was reading books and learning and meditating. I had a consistent meditation practice for a long time, but there was something that really, really shifted for me in engaging in that. I'll give you an example, right? Like you can read books on emotions, and I've read many books on emotions, right? But then I realized I still didn't understand them. I didn't know how to, I didn't know how to work with them, right? And then when I went to this monastery several years ago, and I was practicing the circling practice, and I was like, wow, finally, here I am, 33 years old, finally learning how to work with my emotions, understand my emotions. And it really required there to be somebody, a living person that I was participating with, that was feeding back information, like, through their face, seeing my face, seeing what emotions I had, and like through their emotional intelligence or their deeper understanding, which I didn't possess, I could feed into that and tap into that. So there's something for me about having a living person and engaging in different practices together that feels like an essential aspect to our development. And I've increasingly become skeptical about if we could just read books and develop. Like there's this one guy on YouTube. He's grown a pretty big following, and it's like around psychology and self-healing. And he's like, oh, you got to read all these books to heal yourself. And I'm like, I don't know if you can heal yourself in the same way as you can in a relationship as you can in a book. So yeah, that's just something that you're like one of those people that when I think about like somebody I want to collaborate with or do something with, for some reason you're the person that pops up in my head, because
Awesome.
I feel like you, a lot of this, like I've tried to do some of the things you do, and I'm like, I just can't do what you do, right? Like with the synthesis and like putting all that together, like that's like your thing. And then there's this other aspect which I've just found, like these relational practices and these group practices that are facilitated, that seem so important. And I just wonder how that might fit into Sloww or into a lot of the stuff that you're doing. I don't know. Like I'm just throwing that out there, that I see that being a potential piece of, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's another thing that's a both and, right? It can be, it shouldn't certainly be only book reading. And like I said, for me, the book reading is in service to the living. So everything that I'm doing, so in terms of like relational practices, like I'm testing all of these things out, like on myself, and trying things out, and also with everybody I'm interacting with in life. Right. So it could be the service worker who's coming over to fix our broken whatever, in our house. It could be, the person who's dropping off the mail. It could be interacting with my wife on a daily basis. It could be, so the relationality doesn't always have to be in a container per se of like a certain retreat or whatever it may be, in order to practice some of that stuff. Like that's where I feel like I said, the training ground and the playing field are like one and the same. It's like literally like, incorporating these things into your life in real time. So the learning and the living are just one and the same for me. But I do understand what you're saying in terms, this kind of goes back to like the ego development theory, aboutism thing, right? Where people are just learning, which can be a form of procrastination or bypassing, especially it could be emotional bypassing, where you're just learning things and thinking you're dealing with things when you're not actually, applying them to your life. So that's definitely, of course, all things self-bias and confirmation bias and all those different cognitive biases and fallacies and things are always at play. So self-honesty is another huge aspect of this, and humility, being able to at least be vulnerable with yourself and be honest with yourself. So yeah, all those things are at play, but I think it's definitely a both and some of it too could be just typology. You said you're extrovert, I'm hardcore introvert.
I think about that. Yeah, I think about
so
that also,
could be at play, because developmental stage theories, a lot of them say that like your typology is just something that will just play out in its own, unique way through the different stages. So you can be any type going through, similar themes and stages. So that could be something that's at play too. But yeah, I would encourage, this is where I encourage people to, people are like, should I do this? Should I do that? Whatever. It's like, well, just spend some time just listening to what life is telling you. Like, is life telling you do you feel like an urge or desire to give that a try or not? Are you forcing it? And to do things when they're most alive for you. So that's something I also talk about in the course, is like, procrastination to me is no longer a problem when passion is at play. So when something is most alive for you, there's no problem with procrastination. It's just something that like life is naturally living through you. And so trying to figure out, doing enough reflection and contemplation and even meditation to be able to figure out like, well, what are the inquiries that are most alive for me? Like, what's my most burning question at this point in time? And that's where a lot of those slow stages upon reflection came to be, because I didn't create those stages until years later. I had to look back upon reflection and say, this was the question that I didn't realize it in the midst of it, but I now realize that this was the question I was trying to figure out. Like, how do I live an intentional life? How do I find purpose? All those types of questions. And one question leads to the next, right? Because it gets ever deeper. But like Roca says, live the questions. That was another thing that was, since our last conversation a year ago, I discovered the concept of living inquiry, or living life as inquiry, where it's like, oh yeah, duh, I've been doing that for years, but I didn't have the words to articulate that that's what I was doing. I am just asking myself questions about myself and life, and then trying to figure things out. And you're not going to come to answers and conclusions about everything, but just living the question can be enough sometimes to directionally kind of figure out what direction you want to go in.
Yeah, so I know you've mentioned several times the synthesizer course in our conversation, but maybe this is a good time to kind of explain a little bit more about what this project is, and what you've learned through creating this course, and who it's for. Maybe people listening to this might be interested in it.
Yeah, totally. Is it cool? I'm working on what I'm calling a synthesizer manifesto or synthesizing mind manifesto. Can I just read you like 2 paragraphs from it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I feel like that'll be a more articulate way to say it. And then we can slice and dice it and dissect it however you'd like.
Go for it.
Okay, so this kind of covers, just to set the ground and preface all this, kind of sets like the challenge of why this course should exist and the vision for it. And it gets into who the course is for and things like that too. So no one needs to be convinced that we are drowning in information, specialized information, fragmented information, polarized information, disinformation, you name it. Yet while we're drowning in too much information, we're simultaneously starving from too little wisdom. In other words, the information revolution hasn't yet become the integration revolution. The World Wide Web hasn't yet become the World Wise Web. How do we bring that about? If we can't solve our problems with the same mind that created them, then the problems of today require a mind of the future. This mind of the future has been called the synthesizing mind, the most important mind of the 21st century. Synthesis is now quite literally a 21st century survival skill. So where are all the synthesizers? We know we need synthesizing minds, but we're lacking knowledge about it, evaluation of it, and training for it. But perhaps the biggest challenge of all is that it's often believed that synthesizers don't know how they synthesize. that synthesis is just an unconsciously implicit or tacit thing that just happens. So you can think of like inventors with like a eureka moment or an aha moment of invention, but then they can't explain to you how they came up with the invention. It's like, almost just this like unconscious incubation process that just bubbles up. So that's kind of one of the challenges that I've seen expressed is like, well, even if you're a synthesizer, you don't know how you do it. So the idea is that this course presents a new vision in an attempt to make synthesis consciously explicit in order to cultivate a new generation of synthesizers. It shows you strategically and step by step how to catalyze your own synthesizing mind. And the definition that I give of that is a holistic mind that is composed of interconnected information, networked knowledge, and webbed wisdom. So that's kind of just a general gist outlining kind of the challenge and the vision of what this is. But the other thing that I think about is that there's a multitude of note-taking and writing courses out there, but where are all the thinking courses? I don't know if I've seen any like high quality, higher order level thinking courses that are available to people. So part of this was the idea that, if something doesn't exist, you must create it. It's that idea. I think it's like a Toni Morrison quote that's like, if there's a book you want to read that doesn't exist, you must write it. So it's kind of the same thing of like, this is the course that I wish existed years ago when I first discovered the words synthesis, synthesizer, synthesizing, to be able to articulate to myself what I already intuitively knew. So it was just another one of those examples of like, I felt like I was being called by life to bring this to life in that sense. So in terms of who the course is for, I would say there are like maybe a few buckets of people who would be interested in this. First is thinkers in general. So we've talked about generalists. We've talked about, I guess similar synonymous terms would be like autodidacts, self-learners, lifelong learners, students of life, philomaths, polymaths. All of these types of terms kind of are at play. So any thinker in general would probably be interested in the course. Then you have a subset of people who are students. So probably like high school, college, higher education students, and probably even some teachers and professors would be interested in it for their students. Maybe even some like gifted grade schoolers would be interested in it. And then you've got professionals, so people who want to level up their minds in order to take their career to the next level. So like top talent professionals, people who are involved in like continued talent and development, learning and development in their professional career would probably be interested in it. And then I would say entrepreneurs. I have people who reach out that are like, I want to do something similar to what you're doing. I feel like that is exactly how my mind is wired. Help me do that. So the course literally outlines how I do everything, how I search, how I curate, how I ask questions, reading, note-taking, summarizing, synthesizing, writing, creating, discussing, developing, that whole kind of flywheel circle that we talked about now. It dissects every part of the entire process and how I've created every single thing I've created on Sloww. The email newsletter, the whole website, like literally everything in minute detail. So that's kind of the challenge and the vision. The idea is that not only can you better articulate your own synthesizing mind and be able to put the label on yourself that you are a synthesizer, but because the course is paired with a community, you're also becoming part of a community of synthesizers. So you're able to quote unquote find the others and have a curated global network of synthesizers that I haven't found anywhere else before. So it's a combination of leveraging your own synthesizing mind and connecting it with other synthesizing minds.
Yeah, it's fascinating idea, and I haven't seen anybody do something like that. I was looking at the portal, and it's just so in depth, all the lessons that you have for this. So I'm looking forward to going through it. I'm curious, before creating this course, did you gauge interest in it? How did you think about balancing the relationship between creating what you're interested in and with what people want?
Yeah, so this was another area where I wasn't sure how many people would be interested in this, because this is something that is a little bit more nuanced. And I've been talking about this course for probably 3 years. It took that long, and I'm glad. On one hand, I'm glad that it took this long, because the concepts that I've discovered, the development that I feel like I've been able to go on myself, all of that is now incorporated into the course. So at the end of the course, actually the last module actually goes into the development side of things, the personal development side of things. So I talk about ego development theory and perspective transformation and transformative learning theory and all those things. But part of it was I just felt like I had to get this out because it was something that I was personally interested in. The other side was because I want to create a course for each slow stage, and this is the foundation of everything. I felt like I had to do this first before. I know more people are going to be more interested in an intentional living course and even a life purpose course than this course. But I felt like, this is the one that I feel like is going to be my flagship thing that I'm going to put the most effort into, that's going to be the most comprehensive. And going back to the money side, that'll be a higher price point. The other courses, I feel like I'll be able to do a lower price point, which makes it then more accessible to more people. So part of it was that. And then the last part was, because I've been teasing this for years now, talking about it in the newsletter, I have been capturing interest. So I've asked people to let me know if they're interested. And I think over the last 2 or 3 years, I've had 500 to 750 people say that they were interested. Now, of course, you're never going to get close to 100% conversion rate. And so that can be misleading, but it was enough for me to say, okay, I'm interested. I feel like I need to bring it to life. Enough other people have expressed interest. And then it's the foundation of everything else. So it's got to be first. So the combination of all of that together was like, this has got to be the first thing that I do. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, what makes you most angry about society today?
I don't know. I probably would have given you a completely different answer, maybe even a year ago, but certainly 5 or 10 years ago. In the past, I would have probably given you an answer like, well, why can't everyone just be smarter? Or why can't everyone just be wiser? Or what is so hard
more
about
developed.
that? Oh, yeah. Why can't everybody be
post-conventional?
Why can't everybody be more post-conventional? Yeah. Why can't everyone be enlightened and transcendent? That's probably what I would have said years ago. But these days, I don't feel like, even with the ridiculousness of what you see in the news and society and everything else, I don't feel like it leads me to anger anymore, because I feel like I understand where people are coming from now. With the lottery of birth combined with ego development theory and everything else at play, even Nora Bateson's work about contextuality and everything else, everything seems to make sense to me. Why people are experiencing the world how they are and interpreting it the way they are. And the other thing that I've come back to a lot is that there's no such thing as wrong experience. And by experience, I mean just conscious experience. Like think of like Douglas Harding's Headless Way, or just awareness in general, or like you wake up in the morning and here you are again, like all of this, turned on again. There's no such thing as having like just wrong conscious experience. Everyone is experiencing life the way they're experiencing it. And for an infinity multitude number of reasons that we can't even fathom. Like there's so much at play. We boil it down to nature and nurture, right? But that means a million different things and we could not possibly put it all in a single list. That incorporates traumas, that incorporates, all of Robert Sapolsky's work about the biology of behavior, Bernardo Kastrup's work, I've been diving into more recently. Like all this stuff is at play at any given time. And so it's less about anger now and more about like, oh, okay, like I kind of understand where people are coming from. There are 2 quotes that I come back to. I'm going to butcher them right now. One is by R.D. Laing, who wrote a book called Knots. I think Suzanne Cook-Reuter actually recommended this book to me. It's like all these it's like paradoxical poetry, essentially. It's a mind bender for sure. It's like a super short book, but R.D. Laing has a quote that's like, we can see people's behavior, but not their experience. So we get angry because we see people's behavior in the world and we're like, how could that happen? How could somebody do that terrible thing or whatever it may be? And we judge it that way and we blame people, but we don't see their experience. We can't see how they're, interpreting life, what they're aware of, what they aren't aware of, and therefore what they can question and can't question, how they create meaning and perspective. So we don't get to see any of that. We try to put ourselves in other people's shoes as much as we can, but it's almost like you have to put yourself in someone else's total experience of life, like 100%, to be able to really understand where they're coming from and how they're interpreting things. And then there's an axiom of clinical psychology, which essentially says the same thing. Like we can't ever see someone's experience of how they're experiencing life. And therefore we're not seeing the full picture. We're never seeing the full picture. We're always judging it partially, and we're getting angry because of that partial judgment. So I feel like I've gotten a lot better about being able to understand, like, there are a multitude of reasons why that person is doing what they're doing. And biologically, psychologically, culturally, like all that stuff factors in and it all adds up, and it might make sense to them. Like I actually asked this to my brother earlier this year. I was like, do you think everybody is doing their best in any given moment? And I won't tell you his answer. I'll tell you my answer. My answer was like, I think they actually are. Even what looks like self-destructive behavior or bad behavior or whatever else, they're doing that because they think it's the best thing for them to do in that given moment, or they can't help but do it in that given moment, whatever it may be. Like, there are survival implications at play, not just biologically, like survival and reproduction stuff, but psychologically, like survival of the ego, survival of the sense of self, like all those types of things, reputation management, self-preservation, like all these concepts are at play. And people are doing what they do for a number of different reasons. So that was a really long-winded answer, but hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And, there's one thing that you've mentioned several times, and we spoke about this the first time, but I see a third conversation, which can just be around the topic of lottery of birth and free will. And I know that's something that's really interesting for you, and you're going to keep, kind of thinking about that and synthesizing these ideas. So I really see that being another conversation in the future that could be really interesting for us to explore.
Yeah, totally.
So I'll ask maybe two more questions and we'll wrap up. I know we've been going for a while.
Yeah, no worries. No rush on my end.
Yeah. When was the last time you cried tears of joy?
Cried tears of joy. I don't know. And I guess that means it's been a while. But I can tell you that it's going to be coming up soon.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say you're going to have a kid, yeah, so that might be.
I think we mentioned that before we started recording. So yeah. We, my wife and I have been married for, it'll be 13 years. Actually, this baby will be like our 13-year wedding anniversary present.
Wow.
But yeah, we've got a baby girl due in early July. So I know when the next tears of joy will be coming, even if I can't remember the last one. But
yeah. Yeah. So
I will tell you though, in terms of tears of joy, I don't know that it always has to be physical. I don't know. I feel like you could cry emotional tears of joy. Maybe this is crazy, but I feel like you could cry emotional tears of joy that don't necessarily manifest as physical tears, like going down your face.
Yeah.
And in that instance, I feel like that happens a lot more often for me. And I feel like that happens in terms of aha moments, moments of just realization, moments of articulation, moments of grace, where life just gives you grace for no reason that you feel like you deserve or anything else. And I would describe those as like emotional tears of joy, where it's just like, it's almost just like a full body relief, like physiological, like sigh of relief, where it's like, oh my God, like, thank you. Like, thank you, life. But it might not necessarily manifest as like, bawling physical tears, but I have a lot more of those, I would say.
Yeah. I can resonate with that. I think it's very similar, and sometimes it doesn't quite get to the point where the tears coming out, but I get these moments like teary-eyed, or just like the sense of like joy and love and gratitude. Like I get that with playing with my children a lot, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a tear flowing down my cheek, but it's like it's there. It's like right there, like I'm in it. Yeah,
I would say even moments of like serendipity or synchronicity. I feel that. There are sometimes, this is super weird and probably some form of pseudoscience, but I feel like there are moments where I have that like aha moment, or like something just clicks and like it almost makes you like sit back in your chair. And then for whatever reason, this has happened to me like 3 to 5 times probably, where the sun just starts shining Like it's almost like the sun like came out from behind the clouds. Maybe it's just like a left brain, right brain thing. It could be, it's probably one of those things where it's like a simple explanation where it's like, I'm just like in like a relaxed state in that moment. And I'm more attuned to like my environment, but it's like the sun starts shining down like the moment it happens. Maybe it's crazy. Maybe it's just an attention thing, but I've noticed it like 3 or 5 times. And it's like, okay, there's like, that's either like just some coincidence or synchronicity, or I'm just attuned to something that maybe happened 5 minutes ago, but I wasn't aware of it at that time. Who knows?
Yeah, that's making me think of a time that me and my friends were on some psilocybin mushrooms, and we're like playing this playlist that was specifically designed for this kind of a trip, and like the sky is like synchronizing with the music, and it was like the same thing as like everybody's mood was like gloomy, and then it was the sky was gloomy, and then all of a sudden everybody's mood was like uplifted, and the sun came out, and it was like, yo, is the music, the trip, the clouds all synchronized together? Like, what the hell is going on? It's
Nice.
like this mind-blowing thing.
You know what? I listen to enough electronic dance music that I should probably be doing psychedelics. That would take my music listening to a whole new level, I'm sure.
It definitely would. So, yeah, Kyle, I mean, this has been a very wide-ranging conversation, as I imagined it would be. You know, we spoke about money and meaning and how that's translated for you with Sloww. We touched on ego development theory. You know, spoke about spirituality, the meta crisis, identity, and you know, touched on, you know, you were sprinkling in there some free will and some of these other topics, living inquiry and things you've been thinking about. So we've covered a lot of ground. And before we wrap up, I have one more question for you. Let's imagine many days from now, it's your final day on Earth, and everything you've ever created, Sloww, your community, your course, everything has to go with you. However, you're granted the ability to broadcast a short message that every person in the world could hear. What would that message be?
Oh boy. That's like
Pressure's
a version.
on.
Yeah, right. That's like a version of the question of like, you know, if you had a billboard and could only put one, you know, short message on it, what would you put on it? So can I give 2 answers?
No, nah, sure. No. Go ahead. Yeah. 2 points. Yeah.
I really do think the lottery of birth is such a big realization that I might put something about that on there. But it kind of relates to my second answer anyway, which is it's just the ultimate perennial question, which is, who am I? And how you answer that question depends on how you see yourself in the world at any given time. So this kind of relates back to psychological development. Obviously, this is huge in spirituality. You could say this is one of the ultimate points of spirituality, is the self-inquiry into who am I? And so the message would probably be in the form of a question, because I couldn't put a message out there in a way that's like a statement or a comment with like a period at the end of it. Like, it's got to be this, and you got to think about it like this one way. Because as we know, based on psychological development, that message, no matter what it is going to be interpreted a million different ways by a million different minds. So I would probably put some form of the question of who am I? Maybe I would just put who am I? Because even if someone is at a conventional level of development, that gets you thinking. When I first started thinking about that question of who am I, you start thinking about the things like, I'm my resume, I'm my house, I'm my net worth, I'm my car, I'm my clothes, all those types of things. And even starting there, if you ask the question, who am I, to yourself, and that's where you start, that's fine, as long as that's the start. Because a lot of people aren't even starting, right? So if you can prompt someone to just even start there, that leads to everything else. That leads to you investigating your own mind. That leads to beyond mind, all of the other stuff, the deeper spirituality stuff. But just starting with the question, who am I, in whatever way you interpret it, is probably the question that I would urge people to ask.
Yeah, I love that you didn't give a statement and you gave a question instead.
You got to live the questions. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your curiosity and your inquisitiveness, and you know, you could see that in every synthesis and everything you're doing with Sloww. I've been following your work for a while, and I really look forward to the stuff that you got coming up and diving into the Synthesizer course. And Yeah. Thanks a lot for coming on again, Kyle. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Artem, for having me. And I'm more than happy to do round 3 whenever you want. And maybe I'll have a little baby girl here sitting with me. So
yeah.
yeah.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
Thank you.